Now let's get our hands dirty managing lights in a more complicated scene. In this clip, we pick up from the previous clip on the render quick settings and light lister and get a little more practice managing a larger scene and turn a day render into night. Open the scene file, patio light lister start, and then go ahead and open the outliner. We can see just a few lights in the scene. Now in the V-Ray tab, open the light lister. There's quite a lot of lights in this scene actually. What's happening, as you can see in the outliner, several lights are actually grouped in with scene objects. So the light lister is a much faster way to see the lighting content of a scene when you first get into it. Now the only light that's enabled, as we can see, is the sunlight. Make the camera view active and go ahead and start an IPR render. What we get is a nice daytime render of a lazy afternoon on a patio. In render settings, we can see that GI is turned on. Now granted, there's a lot still to do in the scene to get the materials to look right and tweak the lighting and so on, which we're going to do throughout this course. A lot of the lights listed in the light lister are lights that are used for a nighttime rendering of the patio. So turn off the sun and the VFB gets a bit darker, but not all the way. In render settings, in the overrides tab, uncheck default light. If nothing else, this is a good habit to get into as a lighter, though in this scene it's not really going to affect much. I like to turn that off. Now the light we do get is from the overrides that are set here for the environment, and this is because of the sun and sky system that was put into the scene. Turn off the override altogether and it all goes black. Now we're going to change this from a daytime render to a nighttime render. So in the light lister, turn on V-Ray Light Rect 1. This is a basic moonlight that we set up for the scene, but it's still super duper dark. That's because of the sun and sky system. When you enable sun and sky, the scene's camera needs to be set to a V-Ray physical camera, which is very much like using a real camera. We'll cover this later in the course, but basically the camera as a physical camera is set to be in bright sunlight. Now, select the camera and under the extra V-Ray attributes, just go ahead and disable it, and we'll have a regular Maya camera again. Now you're getting some reasonable moonlight. In the light lister, set a higher temperature to cheat more blue from the moonlight. You can experiment with some values and see how the IPR reacts. I'll set mine to 10,000 Kelvin. Now toggle on the rest of the rect and sphere lights in this section to get lighting to come from the house behind us. Experiment with the color temperatures for these sphere lights here to cheat a little more warmth coming from inside the house. Now I'm going to settle on 3800 degrees for a nice warm incandescent look. Now here's a cool thing. If you want to automate any of these, it's easy to set up an expression for one of these lights directly through the light lister. Now here by right-clicking, I can create a new expression that will drive the temperature of all the lights. Now what I'll do is I'll set up the first two light temperatures to be driven by the third light temperature. So I'm going to copy and then paste the attribute name, and I'm going to set it equal to the temperature attribute for this name. So I'll copy this and I'll paste it in here, and I'll add dot temperature to link those attributes together. I'll hit create, and as you can see, we've got an expression attached. I'll do the same for the second light by copying and pasting the attributes to be equal to each other. Now both of these expressions will make the first two lights listed be driven by this value, as you can see here. So now this one light will control the temperatures for the other two lights as well. Now I'll go back to 3800. Now You can certainly create these expressions directly in the attribute editor as well. And of course, this is just one way to automate this kind of process where you're driving different attributes together. But I just wanted to kind of nerd out a little bit with you over this. I'll remove these expressions by deleting them and make sure that these three lights are set to 3800 Kelvin. Now, all of these lights are IES lights, which basically means they read a .ies file that contains a profile from real-world light manufacturers that describe how that light behaves and looks, like you can see here with this light fixture in the render. Now, when you turn these all on, you'll notice that the wall sconces and the other lights on the patio light up the space. And as you saw earlier in the outliner, all these IES lights are actually grouped under the light fixture geometries. So there's actually quite a few of them in the end, but they give the scene kind of a nice lighting. Now, experiment with the color temperatures of the IES lights. For example, if you want them to all look like old school fluorescent lights instead of traditional incandescent fixtures. I'll keep mine all as warm lights, but I do want to make them less bright. They're a little too much in the render. Now, instead of typing in the value for each one in the light lister, I'm going to go ahead and select the first one, and then I'll hold down Shift and I'll select all the others in the list. You can see the attributes in the attribute editor, but of course in Maya, changing the attribute here when you have all of them selected only changes the value for the most recently selected light, like you can see in the light lister. Now go over to the channel box instead and set the intensity mult value from 1 to 0.5, and you'll notice in the light lister that all the lights change over. Now when you go ahead and resume the render again, it makes the lights a lot nicer to look at. Now go ahead and stop the IPR and save the image to your history. Now let's set this up for a production quality rendering. Open the V-Ray Quick Settings and then go ahead and click on the exterior preset and then render the scene. Now bear in mind there are a lot of lights that are set up in this scene, and this render is going to take a few minutes. Now I wish I could actually fast forward things in real life like a superhero, like I'm doing here, but after just about 8 minutes of elapsed time on my 4 GHz Intel i7 CPU, I get this image, which is actually suitable for use if it's not for making better V-Ray materials and these weird gray transparent leaves and a bunch of other tweaks that we still need to make throughout this course. Okay. In the quick settings, our GI preset is set to BF plus BF, which is not best friend plus best friend. It stands for brute force and brute force for both GI calculations. These are called GI engines. Change this preset to BF plus LC, which stands for light cache. Save your previous render to the history and then render with this adjustment. This setting caches one of those two GI engine calculations for a boost in speed without sacrificing much on accuracy at all. Now, we'll go over these in more detail in the future in this course to better understand the GI engines, but as the render resolves, we get a great still frame in just over 5 minutes. And when you compare to the previous render that had brute force and brute force, the changes are actually minor. Although brute force is definitely more accurate, the light cache does a nice job without a perceivable change. Now, we'll cover these GI engines later on, but we did save some time on our still frame rendering with no perceived loss in detail. Now, you can also set the anti-aliasing or AA quality lower to shave more time off your render as you prefer, but when you're satisfied with your modified settings in the Quick Settings window, you can go ahead and save them by clicking Manage Presets and Save Settings as Preset. And of course, you can load it the next time you want those settings through here as well. Now, as we've seen in this clip, We spent some time getting some experience with managing a more complicated setup using just the light lister and quick settings, and picked up a few bits of information on how V-Ray lighting works in general as we went along.